What if the most dangerous place a child can grow up isn't a war zone or a broken neighborhood, but a loving home that isn't actually loving at all? Because here's the thing about being raised by a narcissist. There are no bruises to point to, no obvious villain. Just a parent who smiled in public, demanded perfection in private, and made you feel like your entire worth was conditional on good behavior, on achievement, on making them look good. And the child who grows up in that environment doesn't come out broken in ways people can easily see. They come out broken in ways they can't even explain to themselves. Let's talk about what actually happens. The first thing a child learns when raised by a narcissistic parent is that their emotions are an inconvenience. You cry, and instead of comfort, you get irritation. You're excited about something, and somehow the conversation circles back to them. You have a bad day, and suddenly you're being dramatic. Over and over, the message gets installed like software. Your feelings don't matter here. Only mine do. Psychologists call this emotional invalidation. But for the kid living it, it doesn't have a name. It just feels like something is wrong with me. And that belief, it follows them everywhere. Children raised by narcissistic parents become experts at reading the room. Not because they're naturally gifted at it, because they had to be. Survival required it. Is mom in a good mood today? Is dad going to explode over dinner? You learn to scan for emotional weather patterns before you even take your coat off. That hypervigilance starts as protection, and then it just never turns off. These kids grow up to be adults who apologize before they've done anything wrong, who shrink themselves in relationships, who feel a specific kind of panic when someone seems even slightly upset with them. Not because they're weak, because they were trained to manage someone else's emotional world at the expense of their own. Here's the part nobody talks about. Narcissistic parents often love their children in the only way they know how, which is as an extension of themselves, not as a separate human being with their own needs and identity. The child becomes a mirror, a trophy, a reflection. Get good grades? That's their success. Embarrass them publicly? That's a betrayal. The love is real, but it's also conditional, and conditions change, which means the child is never truly safe. They're always auditioning. Psychologists have a term for what this does to development. It disrupts something called object constancy, the ability to hold a stable, loving image of someone even when they're not there or when you're angry with them. Kids from narcissistic homes often struggle with this their whole lives. Relationships feel unstable. People feel unreliable. The moment conflict appears, the whole thing feels like it might collapse, because that's what it always did. The cruelest inheritance of a narcissistic upbringing isn't anger, it's the lack of a self. When your childhood job was to reflect someone else's needs, reflect their image, manage their emotions, you never really got to figure out who you are, what you like, what you want, what you think. By the time you're an adult, those questions feel genuinely terrifying, because nobody ever cared about the answers. Some of these children become overachievers, driven not by passion, but by a deep, unrelenting need to finally be enough. Some become people pleasers, allergic to conflict, suffocated by their own agreeableness. Some repeat the pattern entirely because the only model of love they ever had was control dressed up as care. And some go very quiet and stay that way. The frustrating truth is that healing from this isn't straightforward, because you're not healing from something that happened to you. You're healing from something that was never given to you. A stable identity, emotional permission, the experience of being loved without conditions. Therapy helps, specifically approaches that rebuild what developmental psychologists call the sense of self, learning to identify your own emotions without immediately questioning whether they're valid, learning that conflict doesn't mean abandonment, learning that you are allowed to take up space, but it takes time. because you're not unlearning a bad habit. You're rebuilding a foundation that was never properly poured. Here's what research consistently shows. Children of narcissistic parents are significantly more likely to struggle with anxiety, depression, and difficulties in adult relationships. They're more prone to codependency, more likely to end up in relationships that mirror the dynamic they grew up in, not because they want to, but because familiarity reads as safety even when it isn't. The brain doesn't know the difference between comfortable and healthy, it just knows what it recognizes. But here's what's also true. Awareness is the beginning of everything. Understanding why you apologize too much, why you people please until you disappear, why intimacy feels like a threat and not a gift. That understanding isn't just interesting. It's the first real act of self-respect many of these people have ever extended to themselves. You weren't too sensitive. You weren't too much. You weren't the problem. You were just a child trying to be loved by someone who didn't know how. And if you see yourself in any of this, that's not a diagnosis. That's a starting point. If any part of this felt uncomfortably familiar, not for you, obviously, for a friend, type "asking for a friend" in the comments. We see you, and you are not alone.